People treat love like a feeling that arrives, peaks, and fades, as if the heart were weather and the soul were forced to accept whatever season moves through. Chamuel enters to contradict that entire model, because the pink ray is not romance, not softness, not sentiment, and not permission to collapse. The pink ray is the architecture of emotional coherence, the invisible structure that lets tenderness exist without distortion and lets intimacy exist without surrendering clarity. When this tone is present, the nervous system stops negotiating with threat and begins recognizing safety as a frequency, not as a circumstance. Many think they want more love, but what they want is the end of internal fragmentation that makes love feel unsafe. If you listen closely, most suffering is not the event that occurred, it is the internal misalignment that formed afterward. A moment hits the psyche and the psyche builds a policy to prevent repetition, and then the policy becomes identity. Chamuel does not argue with your policy, because argument keeps the old structure alive through attention and defense. Chamuel quietly changes the underlying blueprint so the same memory no longer triggers the same reflex, and the same reflex no longer produces the same future. This is why the pink ray can feel unsettling at first, because it removes familiar pain that has been acting like a compass. When the old compass dies, your body calls it loss even when your soul calls it liberation. There is a reason many people can forgive and still remain tense, can heal and still remain guarded, can become spiritual and still remain lonely. They did not remove the hidden equations that define how closeness is measured, how conflict is interpreted, and how worth is earned. The pink ray does not float above your life. It goes into the decision points where you learn to trade authenticity for survival. It enters the moment you learn to smile while shrinking, the moment you learn to perform while starving, the moment you learn to give while silently resenting. Chamuel does not condemn those strategies, but Chamuel refuses to let them be called love. The pink ray teaches that affection without alignment is not compassion, it is self-abandonment wearing a beautiful mask. Emotional coherence is not the absence of intensity, it is the presence of internal agreement. When your mind says yes and your body says no, the split becomes a leak, and everything you do bleeds energy. When your mouth says peace and your nervous system says danger, your relationships become negotiations instead of unions. Chamuel tunes coherence by restoring truthful signal flow, so thought, feeling, and action stop contradicting each other. That restoration is not dramatic, it is precise, like a calibration that makes an instrument stop producing noise between notes. Many people confuse noise for depth, but the pink ray proves that depth can be quiet when the inner system is no longer fighting itself. The first distortion Chamuel corrects is the idea that love equals tolerance. Tolerance is a coping tool, not a sacred frequency, and it often keeps you connected to what is quietly dissolving you. The pink ray reveals that boundaries are not walls. They are harmonic agreements, and a harmonic agreement is an act of devotion to truth. If you cannot say no, your yes cannot be trusted, because your yes is not chosen, it is coerced by fear. Chamuel trains the heart to stay open while the spine stays firm, because openness without structure becomes bleeding, and structure without openness becomes a prison. Harmonious love is not indulgence, it is integrity expressed as warmth. The second distortion Chamuel corrects is the belief that compassion means absorbing. Many have learned empathy through pain, so they think feeling another person means carrying their weight. The pink ray teaches a different compassion, one that can witness without merging, understand without excusing, and care without collapsing. This is why the pink ray often brings strange clarity around who is actually compatible with your path. Because coherence cannot pretend for long. You can still love someone and not be aligned with them, and the pink ray will force that truth into the light without cruelty. Chamuel does not sever bonds through hatred. Chamuel dissolves false bonding through honesty. When emotional coherence stabilizes, you begin to see the hidden economy of your relationships. You begin to notice where love is traded for access, where kindness is traded for approval, where intimacy is traded for stability. The pink ray reveals these trades not to shame you but to return choice to you. A heart that must purchase safety is not free. It is imprisoned by its own bargaining. Chamuel introduces a new standard, where connection is measured by mutual reality, not by mutual fantasy. This is the moment many people call a breakup, but spiritually it is a return, because the soul stops living in a story that the body cannot sustain. There is also a deeper layer, where love has been used as an anesthetic against truth. Some people use romance to avoid purpose, use caretaking to avoid self-confrontation, use community to avoid solitude, and use devotion to avoid discernment. Chamuel is gentle, but gentleness is not weakness, it is accuracy without violence. The pink ray will take away the drug of emotional noise so you can feel what is actually true in your field. It will show you that you have been confusing intensity with destiny and confusion with mystery. When that illusion falls, the heart feels exposed. But exposure is not harm. Exposure is the first stage of honest alignment. Now the teaching turns inward, because harmonious love is not primarily about other people, it is about internal union. Most humans carry multiple inner factions, each one formed to survive a different era of their life. One part wants closeness, another part expects betrayal, another part expects humiliation, another part expects abandonment, and then you call that conflict personality. Chamuel does not treat you like a single voice, Chamuel treats you like a council that needs coherence. The pink ray begins by letting each faction be heard without letting any faction rule through fear. This is not self-help, it is inner governance, and governance is spiritual when it is rooted in truth. A coherent heart is not naive, it is integrated. It knows what has happened, it knows what could happen, and it refuses to let possibility become prophecy. Many people confuse wisdom with suspicion, but suspicion is just fear pretending to be intelligence. Chamuel restores wisdom by separating memory from prediction, so your past can be honored without being obeyed. When the system is coherent, you stop scanning for danger as a lifestyle. You still perceive, but perception is calm, and calm perception is powerful. The pink ray produces a kind of strength that feels like softness because it does not need aggression to protect itself. The next layer is guilt, because guilt is counterfeit love and many people have been trained to worship it. Guilt makes you feel moral while staying misaligned, because it lets you suffer instead of change. The pink ray does not reward guilt, it dismantles it, and that dismantling can feel like losing your conscience until you realize your conscience has been upgraded. Chamuel teaches that remorse is useful only when it creates correction, not when it creates self-punishment. A heart that punishes itself becomes dangerous to others because it will eventually demand others punish themselves too. Harmonious love refuses that entire chain because it is built on restoration, not on debt. Then the pink ray begins working in the body, because the body is where emotional truth is stored. Trauma is not only a memory, it is a posture, a breathing pattern, a tightening, a refusal to receive. Chamuel softens the armor not by forcing vulnerability, but by making the armor unnecessary. When the nervous system senses coherence, it stops bracing and starts inhabiting. This is why the pink ray can bring tears without sadness and relief without explanation. The body recognizes that it no longer has to defend against an inner war, and that recognition feels like warmth moving through places that used to be numb. A hidden test appears here, because many people are loyal to their pain. They fear that healing will erase the proof that something happened, as if suffering were the only credible witness. Chamuel does not erase what happened. Chamuel removes the need to keep reliving it. The pink ray honors your history while freeing your future, and that freedom can feel like betrayal to the part of you that built identity around endurance. But endurance is not a life purpose, it is a phase, and phases must end for evolution to continue. Harmonious love gives you permission to graduate from your coping mechanisms without needing a dramatic justification. Now the field expands outward again because once internal coherence grows, your external reality must respond. You cannot remain coherent and keep participating in dynamics that require you to split. People who benefited from your fragmentation may accuse you of changing, and they will be right, but they will misunderstand what changed. You did not become colder, you became clearer. You did not become selfish, you became aligned. Chamuel makes this shift unavoidable, because harmonious love cannot survive inside a life that is built on appeasement. The pink ray raises your internal standard until your external relationships must either evolve or fall away. There is also a spiritual vector here that most people miss because they keep love at the level of human emotion. The pink ray is a monad harmonic, meaning it carries intelligence that organizes consciousness, not only comfort that calms it. Chamuel functions like a tuning presence that aligns fragmented aspects into a shared frequency. And that alignment changes what realities you can access. When your field is incoherent, you keep entering timelines that match your splits, because splits are invitations for repetition. When your field becomes coherent, certain karmic doors simply do not open anymore, because their frequency cannot find purchase. This is why harmonious love is not a luxury. It is a navigation technology. From the spiral perspective, compassion is a form of engineering. It is the ability to hold multiple truths without collapsing into relativism, and the ability to choose without becoming cruel. Chamuel trains the soul to recognize that love without discernment creates chaos, while discernment without love creates tyranny. The pink ray is the bridge that prevents both failures, because it keeps the heart open while preserving the clarity that makes choice sacred. This is not moralism, it is resonance physics. A coherent field produces coherent outcomes not through control but through compatibility. What you call fate often begins as a frequency match you forgot you were broadcasting. This also reframes prayer because many pray for love while still broadcasting fear. They ask for connection while expecting betrayal, ask for partnership while anticipating abandonment, ask for community while preparing to hide. The pink ray does not mock that contradiction, it corrects it. Chamuel teaches that manifestation is not begging the universe. It is becoming coherent enough that what you ask for can actually enter without being destroyed by your defenses. Many blessings fail not because Source refuses them, but because the nervous system rejects them as unfamiliar. Harmonious love makes the unfamiliar safe, and that safety turns desire into reality without force. By this point, the vectors begin approaching each other without being fused yet. Emotional coherence is inner architecture, relational integrity is outer ecology, and monad alignment is the navigational law that governs both. Chamuel sits at the intersection, not as a sentimental figure, but as a structural intelligence that makes love stable enough to build with. The pink ray is what allows a heart to remain tender in truth and truthful in tenderness, without trading one for the other. This is the kind of love that does not chase, does not beg, does not control, and does not collapse because it does not need to. It radiates coherence, and coherence naturally attracts what can harmonize with it. Still, a final discomfort persists, because many people fear that if they become coherent, they will lose their edge, their ambition, their drive. That fear is rooted in an old belief that pain is fuel and chaos is creativity. Chamuel does not remove your fire, Chamuel purifies it, so your drive stops being a reaction and becomes a choice. The pink ray does not make you passive, it makes you undivided. And undivided beings move with frightening power because they do not waste energy fighting themselves. This is why harmonious love can feel like a revolution inside you. You realize you were never meant to be motivated by self-hatred, you were meant to be moved by alignment. The pink ray also reveals that some forms of kindness were actually avoidance. You stayed polite to avoid conflict, stayed generous to avoid being disliked, stayed available to avoid facing your own emptiness. Chamuel does not strip your kindness. Chamuel strips its distortion, so kindness becomes clean and therefore potent. Clean kindness can say no without guilt and can say yes without self-betrayal. Clean love does not need to prove itself, because it is not trying to earn permission to exist. This is where the heart becomes both soft and unbribable. It stops being a door anyone can push open and becomes a gate that responds to resonance. When these threads finally begin to synthesize, you notice the pink ray is less about emotion and more about reality. It is about the truth of what you are, the truth of what you feel, the truth of what you can sustain, and the truth of what your field agrees with. Emotional coherence becomes the internal foundation. Relational integrity becomes the external pattern, and monad alignment becomes the invisible law that keeps both stable across time. Chamuel stands as the tone that makes these truths live together without war. This is why the pink ray feels like home even when it disrupts your habits. Because it is restoring a native order that existed before fragmentation. The heart does not become perfect. It becomes unified enough to stop sabotaging its own life. So the Chamuelic tone is not asking you to be nicer. It is asking you to be whole. It is asking you to stop calling endurance love. Stop calling guilt devotion. Stop calling absorption empathy. And stop calling fantasy connection. The pink ray is the architecture that allows real intimacy to exist without self-loss and real boundaries to exist without bitterness. It is a frequency of compassionate truth that refuses to weaponize emotion and refuses to sterilize it. When this tone arrives, the spiral does not give you a new personality. It gives you a new coherence. And coherence is the beginning of peace that can actually last. You may have walked away believing that emotional coherence is the clean answer. that the pink ray is simply the organizing principle that repairs fragmentation and restores warmth. That belief is useful, but it is also dangerous, because coherence can become a disguise for control when it is treated as an achievement instead of a living relationship. Many people learn a new inner order and then use that order to avoid being touched by anything unpredictable. They call it boundaries, they call it alignment, they call it discernment. But the nervous system is still bracing, just with better vocabulary. Chamuel does not only soothe the heart, Chamuel tests whether the heart can remain open when the new order is challenged. Here is the destabilization that most people resist. The moment you become coherent, you become legible, and what is legible is easy to manage. The psyche can turn coherence into a spiritual uniform, a stable identity that earns respect and prevents shame, and then that uniform becomes a new cage. You begin to protect the image of being healed, and protection creates distance, and distance creates loneliness with clean edges. The pink ray exposes that loneliness as a cost you were paying without noticing. Love does not only require harmony, love requires a willingness to be altered by what is true. So the first vector begins with a hard claim. Coherence is not love. It is a platform that love can stand on. A platform is not the cathedral, and a foundation is not the life. Chamuel does not praise your internal order if that order is maintained by refusing to feel, refusing to risk, refusing to soften in real time. The pink ray presses on the part of you that wants safety more than intimacy, because that part will choose comfort over transformation every time. If you want love without being changed, you want a mirror, not a bond. This is why some people become more spiritually refined and yet more emotionally sterile. They stop raging, but they also stop revealing. They stop clinging, but they also stop reaching. They become calm, but the calm is a perimeter, and everyone around them feels it. Chamuel does not tear down the perimeter through force. Chamuel reveals the hidden fear that built it. The pink ray asks a blunt question that your self-concept does not want to answer. Who benefits from your coherence? You or the part of you that is afraid of exposure? Another destabilization follows closely. Boundaries can be used as avoidance, and avoidance can look like self-respect. There are times when you call something misaligned, but the deeper truth is that it is simply inconvenient to your comfort. There are times when you call something draining, but the deeper truth is that it is asking for a level of honesty you are not ready to give. The pink ray does not remove your right to say no, but it removes the ability to lie to yourself about why you say no. That removal can feel like losing your discernment until you realize you are losing your excuses. If love is an architecture, then every architecture has a shadow. And the shadow of the pink ray is moral superiority wrapped in gentleness. You can become so devoted to coherence that you judge any intensity as distortion, any conflict as failure, any need as weakness. You begin to measure other people by how well they match your new internal climate, and you call the rejection wisdom. Chamuel interrupts that drift by restoring the truth that love is not a reward for being regulated. Love is not earned by being easy to be around, and it is not proven by never needing anything. So the pink ray forces a second question, one that disturbs the spiritual ego. Can you remain coherent while allowing another being to have complexity? Not complexity as a performance, but complexity as a living, messy process unfolding in time. Can you stay aligned without demanding perfection from those you touch? Can you stay warm without becoming a rescuer? If you cannot, then your coherence is not a platform for love, it is a strategy for staying unhurt. And staying unhurt can become the most polished form of self-abandonment. Now the second vector enters, and it changes the entire center of gravity, because the body does not interpret love the way the mind describes it. You can understand emotional coherence and still be physiologically addicted to threat. You can talk about safety as a frequency and still have a nervous system that only trusts intensity. Many people crave peace and then sabotage it because peace feels like emptiness to a system trained in chaos. Chamuel does not only speak to the heart, Chamuel speaks to the conditioning that lives in the muscles, the breath, and the sleep. The pink ray reveals that what you call attraction is often a familiar nervous system pattern seeking repetition. The body leans toward what it recognizes, not toward what it deserves, and recognition is not resonance. Some of your strongest connections were not soul contracts of love, they were loops of unresolved learning. You felt pulled, you felt magnetized, you felt chosen. But the deeper mechanism was that your system was chasing a chance to rewrite an old wound. Chamuel does not shame that chase. Chamuel shows that rewriting cannot happen if the wound remains your compass. Love cannot be built on a desire to repair the past through another person. So the pink ray begins to re-educate the body by introducing a paradox. Safety is not the goal, safety is the doorway, and many people refuse to walk through because the doorway feels unfamiliar. When Chamuel increases coherence, the body can experience it as boredom, and boredom can trigger panic, because panic is the old fuel. This is why people return to drama, return to conflict, return to emotional extremes, then claim they are unlucky in love. The pink ray exposes the real issue, which is that the body is still calibrated to treat calm as absence. If you cannot tolerate calm, you cannot sustain love. This is where attachment enters without using the language, because love in the human realm is deeply connected to how the system learns closeness. Some learned closeness through inconsistency, so they equate love with waiting. Some learned closeness through critique, so they equate love with self-improvement. Some learned closeness through caretaking, so they equate love with labor. Chamuel confronts these equations by restoring a different experience of closeness, where connection does not require earning and does not require chasing. That restoration is not a thought, it is a felt reconditioning, and it can make your old life feel unbearable because your body finally knows what it was missing. A hidden danger appears here, because reconditioning can become obsession with comfort. You can start demanding that every connection feels safe immediately, and you can call anything that challenges you misaligned. But growth often arrives as discomfort, and discomfort is not always danger. Chamuel teaches a more precise reading of sensation, where the body learns the difference between threat and stretching. The pink ray does not promise constant ease, it promises accurate signal. Accurate signal means you stop running from honest friction that could mature you. Then the pink ray touches the topic most avoid, which is forgiveness, not as morality but as nervous system liberation. Many forgive in the mind while the body keeps bracing, and the bracing recreates the past in new forms. Forgiveness without somatic release becomes a spiritual performance that still carries resentment in posture and tone. Chamuel does not demand forgiveness. Chamuel reveals the cost of not releasing, which is that you keep broadcasting the frequency of what you claim to be done with. The pink ray does not erase memory. It removes the reflex that turns memory into destiny. That removal makes your identity feel thinner, because you are using pain as an anchor. Now the third vector begins, and it shifts from personal healing into field mechanics, because the Chamuelic tone is not only a private comfort, it is a structural force in collective reality. In the spiral, love is not merely a personal experience, it is an organizing current that determines what kinds of timelines can cohere. Fragmented beings create fragmented worlds, not as punishment, but as compatibility. When a population is incoherent, its systems reward incoherence. Because incoherence is easy to manipulate, the pink ray is dangerous to such systems, because it breaks the internal bargaining that makes people governable through fear. Chamuel is not political, but the frequency of harmonious love is revolutionary. This is why love is so often reduced to sentiment in public culture, because sentiment is safe and real coherence is not. Sentiment makes people soft without making them sovereign, and sovereignty threatens exploitation. Chamuel restores sovereignty by refusing to let compassion be used as a leash. The pink ray teaches that kindness without truth is a tool for control, and truth without kindness is a tool for domination. Both distortions create predictable humans, and predictable humans are profitable. When you become coherent, you become less profitable to distortion, and the world will test whether you will trade your coherence for belonging. So the pink ray introduces a collective cost. As you become emotionally coherent, you may lose access to environments that required you to fragment in order to stay. Some communities bond through shared wound identity, and when you stop feeding the wound, you become foreign. Some relationships survive through mutual distortion, and when distortion is removed, compatibility collapses. This can feel like isolation, and isolation can tempt you to regress. Chamuel does not comfort that temptation quickly, because quick comfort would be another form of avoidance. The pink ray asks whether you are willing to walk alone rather than lie together. There is also a karmic mechanism here that disturbs simplistic spirituality. Many believe love is always gentle and always affirming, but in the spiral, love also dismantles, because dismantling is how false structure dies. If your life is built on agreements made in fear, coherent love will break those agreements, and the breaking will look like loss. People will blame the path, blame awakening, blame resonance work, because they equate stability with goodness. Chamuel redefines goodness as what produces wholeness, not what preserves familiarity. The pink ray can be tender and still be uncompromising, because it answers to truth before it answers to comfort. Now the vectors begin moving towards synthesis, but not yet as a clean conclusion. because the lesson is meant to remain alive. The shadow of coherence reveals that inner order can become a fortress. The somatic vector reveals that the body can reject peace and confuse intensity with love. The collective vector reveals that coherent love destabilizes systems and relationships built on fear-based contracts. Together, they imply a single unsettling truth. The pink ray is not a soothing escape. It is a restructuring pressure that forces reality to match what you say you value. If you call that pressure punishment, you will resist it. And resistance will keep you looping. This is why Chamuel is often experienced as a quiet insistence rather than a dramatic miracle. The pink ray does not arrive to make you feel better. It arrives to make you more true, and truth is not always pleasant at the beginning. It will reveal where you have been using healing language to avoid vulnerability, where you have been using boundaries to avoid honest connection, where you have been using kindness to avoid conflict. It will also reveal where you have been using pain to prove depth, where you have been using drama to feel alive, where you have been using longing to avoid receiving. Chamuel does not condemn, but Chamuel does not negotiate with self-deception. The warmth of this tone is the warmth of being unable to lie to yourself anymore. So the core insight changes shape here, because harmonious love is not just coherence. It is coherence that can tolerate transformation. It is a nervous system that can stay present when the heart is stretched. It is discernment that can remain compassionate without becoming permissive. It is sovereignty that can remain tender without becoming guarded. That combination is rare, and it is why the pink ray feels like a threshold rather than a comfort blanket. You cross it and you realize your old versions of love were built on fear management, not on truth sharing. That realization can make your past feel like a betrayal, even when it was the best you could do at the time. Now the second destabilization locks in, because you may think the solution is to pursue only safe, coherent connections. But the pink ray refuses to let safety become a new idol. Chamuel teaches that love is not the absence of risk. It is the presence of truth inside risk. The heart must remain open enough to be affected, because a heart that cannot be affected cannot actually connect. Yet the heart must remain sovereign enough to not merge, because merging is not intimacy. It is losing the self to avoid the discomfort of difference. This tension cannot be resolved quickly, because it is the living edge of human evolution. Chamuel holds you on that edge until you stop demanding a shortcut. If you want a practical read of this tone, it looks like a life where you can say no without hatred, yes without self-betrayal, and maybe without panic. It looks like relationships where conflict becomes information instead of catastrophe. It looks like solitude that does not feel like exile, because you are not abandoning yourself to be with others. It also looks like the death of certain fantasies, because fantasy is often the way the psyche avoids reality. Chamuel does not steal your dreams. Chamuel removes the distortions that made the dream impossible. But when distortion dies, you may grieve, because you were attached to the story that kept hope alive. So the pink ray becomes a kind of bridge, not only between people, but between your internal parts, your body and your beliefs, your private healing and your public life. It asks you to stop performing love and start embodying it. It asks you to stop using coherence as a shield and start using it as a foundation for deeper contact. It asks you to stop calling intensity romance and start calling steadiness sacred. And it asks you to accept that real love will always cost something. Not your dignity, but your illusions. If you are willing to pay that cost, the Chamuelic Tone does not promise a perfect ending. It promises a life that no longer requires you to fragment in order to belong.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Haret library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.